Hi, guys. Welcome to A Little Help for Our Friends, a podcast for people with loved ones struggling with mental health. Welcome back, little helpers. Today, I'm going to do something a little different. This episode is going to be a little different than the norm. I'm going to tell a story because tonight, in just a couple hours, I'm going to go downtown in New York to get on a stage and tell one of the most personal stories that I have, which is how I married my wedding officiant. But it's also a story that talks about my fertility journey and what I've learned and what I've learned about becoming a mother. Now, I know that some of you probably have listened to my previous episodes and have heard me tell parts of the story, but this is the first time that I'm going to tell it all in one go, and you could maybe tell that I'm a little nervous. But I'm going to rehearse it here and just tell the story as I remember it, and hope that when I get on stage, I'll remember my words and not just freeze up. But I wanted to take this time just to kind of delve into it and really live the story first. And it really is just the really unexpected way that I became a mother and the really unexpected way that I lived and learned what it means to build a family. I have studied it a lot from the academic side. I've thought a lot about this because I've always wondered what happens when you have a broken attachment, when you grow up in a home where you feel like neglected or abused or that you couldn't really rely on your caregivers or your family. Maybe your family had mental illness or addiction, but usually when you come from such a background like that, it's what we call an attachment trauma, right? Relational trauma. So coming from my background like that, I've always wondered, like, well, then how do we build a family? Like, what does work? What makes sense? How do you do this? And I've really had to unlearn a lot of the coping mechanisms I'd had to help me survive through earlier times in my life, and actually had to learn what it means to build a family and a secure attachment. So I'm going to go through the story. I'm probably going to mess up a lot, but I'm going to give the kind of the unfiltered version here. So I'll start by saying that I used to believe that willpower was everything. I really believe that if I worked hard, put in the effort, sacrifice, that I could earn most things in life that I wanted, right? Just like I earned my way into the Duke PhD program when I was becoming a clinical psychologist, and before and after, I was like, the perfect student, working really hard. I was glued to my laptop for 12 hours a day, every single day. It's not an exaggeration. Um, Trying to do all the things, write the papers, see the patients, right? Like really work hard. And up until that point, I had poured everything into building a career because that was the thing that was most important to me. But when I turned 30, that's when my biological clock started to tick. And I was like, oh, okay, time to make a family. Now it's time for me to go all in on that. And it seemed like everything was going to plan when I'll call him Danny, but you probably know his name from previous episodes. But Danny, my college ex-boyfriend, he came back into my life. I hadn't seen him since college, really. We're a little bit after, but it had been years since we've been in contact, and he was like the one who got away, the one that I pined over, that I always felt like not good enough, and he always like held me at a distance. So when he came back into my life at a mutual friend's wedding, he told me that I was the only woman he's ever really loved. And I was skeptical, but I said, I'm not going to entertain this unless you're ready to commit, unlike before. If you're ready to have a family and get married, that's where I'm at. So if you don't want that, that's cool. I just can't take that risk. And he said everything that I wanted to hear, that He's ready for a family and kids. He is willing to move to be with me, move states, and he was training to be a pediatrician. Right? So, like, cha-ching, like it felt like, oh wow, this was perfect, at least on paper. But I always, even from the very start of that, I had this gut feeling that this wasn't right. I was skeptical. I kept ignoring that though. So when he did move into my house, he moved states to be with me, and he had a really hard time. He got, in trouble in his residency program. I had a really hard time finishing. So he decided he didn't want to be a doctor anymore. And he moved in with me and then said, you know what? I'm just going to take a sabbatical just for like 2-3 months so I could find myself. That sabbatical lasted for a better part of 4 years. He did have some jobs during that time, but for the most part, it was like he was just so steeped in his burnout from his training or, life crisis that he said he could only recover by like taking a break. And most of that was him sitting in my basement playing guitar and smoking weed for like most of those 4 years. The thing that I had a really hard time trying to understand was, is this just a rough patch, right? Like, I've certainly gone through this. Many people, when they go through existential crises and they're at the crossroads, they're like, I'm not sure what I want to do. I need some time to pause and reflect. It could be kind of like a low, but then some people get out of it. So I thought it was that. I thought, he's going through a hard time, he's recovering, he's burnt out, and we'll work through it. But then that 2 to 3 months sabbatical was like 4 months and 5 months. And I would ask, what's your next steps? Are you getting a job? Want to contribute to the household in any way? And he kept saying, well, I'm anxious and I'm still thinking about all these different things. And it was a lot of like ideas, but without any follow through or like a little follow through. But then he would just, I don't know I honestly, to this day, I don't know what happened. It would just like, he would open up an application for a job and then I just didn't know what happened. So it was like, I was kind of left in the dark, and it was these unproductive fights where I would ask him what's going on. He would say, "Oh, you're right. I've been procrastinating. I've been avoiding. I will get back on this." And then a couple weeks go by and nothing would change. So I learned to kind of stop asking and to stop just bringing it up because it wasn't going anywhere. I was just going to make him more anxious. I was, kind of walking on eggshells in that way, as well as paying all the bills. I was, taking care of the house and the food. I'm also doing my master's thesis. Like, I was still doing grad school. So I felt like, okay, I just have to hold on until this horrible stage passes. And I even had to cognitive dissonance myself to convince myself that this was working. This was okay. This is what I wanted. The reality was so different from what we planned or wanted that I was like, maybe this is okay instead. I'm the career woman who can do everything, and he's gonna be the stay-at-home, blah, blah, blah. So I was telling myself stories to just make this okay, because I was like determined to will this family into existence. So much so that we got married in 2018, and immediately we started to try to get pregnant because I thought, well, like the marriage might need some working out, but kids will fix everything, don't they? I know, stupid now. But I just was so desperate to make this work. And I was like, who am I to question a kind, loyal person who wants to be with me and start a family with me? Am I really going to let, the job situation or his existential crisis get in the way? So we tried to have a baby. And I was shocked when we couldn't get pregnant. I mean, it was months and months. I was like, okay, I'm going to take some time. Then after a while, I was like, what is going on? Of course, I type A'd it, right? I applied my type A good student personality to reproduction. So I went on all the internet and went down the rabbit holes of fertility research. And It's really shocking how little we know about fertility. I could not believe that we don't know a lot of reasons why some of us can't get pregnant. We have some things that we know, but there's a lot of mystery involved. And that was so shocking to me. I mean, the science shows that its majority is the woman's fault, right? Which I feel like is a horrible bias in science, right? We're like pointing the finger at women. But the but I still was like, okay, I'm gonna do everything I can to follow the rules and make this work. So I measured my temperature every day. I scheduled sex, very romantic. I took the right supplements, exercise, try to cut down on this food and that food, and whatever. I tried to do all the things every single day, thinking about it. And it was this cycle of disappointment. The 2 weeks leading up to trying, I was doing all the things, measuring, eating, exercising, praying, not praying, being spontaneous, whatever. And then we would try, and then I'd have hope, and then it would be negative. The test would be negative. So that would be over and over again. It was heartbreaking every time. And every time I thought, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's going on? Well, like, why can't I do this? I'm doing all the right things. Why can't I do this? The only thing I really found that men could do to help fertility is abstain from marijuana. So it was pretty much like one of the few things that science points to as how men contribute to infertility. So I was like, okay, Danny, call him Danny, can you please just not um, smoke weed before we try again? And I had started to take some, fertility medications. And I remember being in the kitchen. It was such a hard couple weeks because the medication that I was taking to help me ovulate was making me into a crazy person. Like, I've never experienced this before, but I was having looping thoughts of hurting myself. I knew it was the drugs because it was like, once I took it, I would have these thoughts. And it was so scary and so hard. And I was like, what is happening? This is terrifying. But I was holding myself together and I was like, I'll do anything I can to make this work, to have this baby. So I was standing in the kitchen, just kind of, getting on with my evening, trying to hold myself together. And then Danny was in the basement, hanging out with a friend. And when he came up to the kitchen, the first thing I saw was his eyes, and his eyes were bloodshot. And then a moment later, the smell of smoke hit my nose. And I was heartbroken. And as soon as he saw my face, he started apologizing profusely. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Oh, I forgot. And it almost made it worse because I was like, I was putting my body and mind through hell every single day, thinking about this every single minute, changing anything I could. And he got the luxury to just let it slip his mind. I really, really needed a partner in this. And it was moments like that that felt like I'm alone. I'm carrying this burden alone. So I went to see one of the best fertility doctors at Duke. And I was like so excited to put my hands in to the care of like the best that academia had to offer. But it actually was more depressing than I anticipated. I was alone in our first appointment, and he was just rattling off these really scary statistics and really high prices of all the treatments that were coming up. And I was just sitting there stunned silently. And I said, is there anything wrong with me? Like, will I ever have kids? And he looked me dead in the eye and said, I think there's a 0% chance that you're going to get pregnant naturally. I remember having to hold back my tears until I got to my car. And I got in my car and I sobbed driving home. I called my best friend, Alex. We have been best friends since freshman year of college. And we lived on opposite sides of the country. He was in California and I was in North Carolina at the time. But we still were each other's confidants. Whenever we were stressed out or had a bad time, we'd call each other. And just felt like home to me, to the point where he officiated my wedding to Danny. So I told him what happened, and he was like, I know you're going to be a mother. I have faith. And I remember just wishing that I could have the same faith that he did. So a couple months later, Danny and I started an IVF cycle, and we wanted to have one last hurrah before we did it. So we did mushrooms. And of course, like a perfect student, I was planning, even as I'm doing drugs, but I planned that we will remove the emotional blocks that were preventing us from becoming parents. And we probably connect and emerge as a unit. But instead, I actually slipped into this really unexpected, beautiful journey of my own. I remember closing my eyes, lying down on the couch for hours, and I heard this voice deep within me. It was my voice, but it was older and wiser. And it said, life is maternal energy, this maternal love that gives birth to every living thing in the universe. But you can't control it. You can't grip it, force it, or willpower it. You just have to let it do its thing. You have to trust it. And when you do that, people are going to come and go. Some will be called by it, and some will be scared and run away from it. There's nothing you can do about that. So I woke up from that beautiful trip, and I felt this deep sense of peace and confidence. And I interpreted that feeling as, okay, it's going to work this time. I'm going to get pregnant. A couple days before the embryo transfer, I was talking to Danny, and Danny was advising a friend who was having marital issues of his own. Actually, ironically, they were having IVF struggles, so they were arguing a lot. And Danny was like, oh, yes, it was just so great to support him, because I told him, you just need to listen to what your wife needs and really show up for her. Just do anything you can to show up for her. And I just sat there listening, and I could feel all of my resentment that was pushing down for years. I felt it all rush to my face, this raging, white hot rage. And I was like, how could you advise your friend to do something that I've been begging you to do for 4 years? That's what I wanted from you. And in that moment, I felt done. I really did feel done. We separated, and I explained, like, we are just not in this place. We are not in the place to be a team and build this family together. We're not good. And I don't think we ever will be good. And so we separated. And I mean, it was kind of a longer story than that, because he had hopes that we'd get back together, and even miraculously found a job right in that month that we were separated, and was like, okay, great, we'd get back together. But I said, like, no, there's too much feelings of betrayal that I had, and I just didn't feel like we were on the same page. I didn't feel like we had the same values. And that was really difficult, because I had realized that it wasn't just about a job. Like, it wasn't like if you went back to work, it would all be fine. It was that I didn't feel held in this relationship. I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I could rely on this partner. Even when he was, not working at home, I was doing most of the stuff in the household. So being with him always felt like everything was on my back. I had the emotional labor. He was the fun one. Well, I was the one who did all the stuff. And although I love feeling useful and I take on that role a lot, it felt exhausting and really lonely. So it wasn't like, oh, if he just got a job, it'd be fixed. It was like, how did I feel with this person? And I didn't feel like what I wanted to feel when building a family, which is that I had an equal partner that I can trust. So we divorced. We separated, and then it took a long time to divorce. And it was a terrifying time, because I was 34, I think turning 35, 34, 35, really wanted a family. And then I was single. I had never dated in my life. It's crazy. I never dated on the apps or anything like that. Most of my boyfriends and relationships were just people that I knew and who were my friends, So I was like 34, had to start over, wanted a family, and it was the pandemic. Like, I think we separated in October of 2020. So I was alone. And I mean, like months and months in my apartment alone, not seeing another human being except for Zoom when I was doing internships. So doing Zoom therapy and then just being alone at night. It was horrible. But then in the summer of 2021, Alex came to spend the summer with me. He had a remote job and he was like, I'm going to come and visit you and spend some time. I know you're going through a hard time. So he came and we spent a couple weeks together in Airbnb. It was like super fun with also our other friend. And I remember that we went to see a newborn baby of a friend who just gave birth. And I remember watching him as he held this baby in his hands so gently, and his face just lit up, and he was talking softly to the baby. And I noticed for the first time that he's just such a natural caregiver. He's just so good at making people feel safe and cared for without, just naturally, without making that obvious. So I saw that. And on our cab ride home, he started to cry. He started to talk about, I think we're about to start these new chapters in our lives, start our own families, and we live so far apart from each other that we're going to drift apart as friends. And he was crying, and I instinctively reached out to touch his face in a way that I hadn't before. It was like this very intimate moment. And I think that was the moment that really shifted us out of the friend zone. Shortly after that, a couple weeks later, it's funny because there was something that shifted with us, and we ended up both calling the same mutual friend to tell her about our budding feelings. He called her and was like, I think I like Kibby. I don't know, I don't know what to do with these feelings. And I did the same thing the next day without realizing it. I was like, I think I'm having feelings for Alex. I think there's something going on with this, but it's weird. And she like gently ushered us to address it. She was hinting to both of us that we should connect over it. And it took a long time because I think we were just so terrified to risk this really important friendship. I mean, he was like my best friend. Like whenever, like all throughout our other relationships, we'd be the person that we would call for support, confide in, or whatever. So it's like we were risking a really important relationship in our lives. Finally, he made the first move. And I get to say that because this is my story. He would say something different, but he made the first move. And then it was just clear that, it was so scary, but it felt right. There's something that felt right about being together. And we were together, and the part that really was hard to talk to him about was, he's seen the fertility struggles that I've been through. He was like on the phone with me, right? He knew how hard this was for me. And I was like, it's going to be a long road. We're old. We got it. You're not old, but time is a ticking. I don't know what my fertility is all about. I think that we should start trying, and it's probably going to end up in IVF, if anything. So I was really scared because I remember feeling like I'm going to bring my brokenness to him. I would taint him with my broken uterus or ovaries or whatever, right? So I was like, oh, I'm going to have to put him through the misery of infertility. First month that we tried, I remember I was at an engagement party in Napa, and I just like didn't feel like drinking that much. And then I realized, I think my period is late. It's weird. And I was with Alex. We were in North Carolina, and I remember I thought, I need to know the answer. I need to know if I'm pregnant. I drove early in the morning by myself to a pharmacy. And I remember as I was driving, I thought to myself, these might be the last moments I have to just myself before I become a mother. When I had that thought, I knew that I already knew I was pregnant. But I got the pregnancy test, went to my bathroom, waited, and when I saw the test turn positive, I burst into both laughter and tears. I just had a few moments to myself to process, and I just cried. I just felt this tremendous relief that this horrible, painful, demoralizing journey has come to an end, and I was starting a whole new one, a whole new chapter. Sometimes in life, when you're in a moment where you're at a crossroads, right? Where you're at a milestone and you're like, things are going to be different from now on. And that was that moment for me. I was like, oh God. And of course, when I told him, he was like, I told you you get pregnant. So it's just a funny response from him. And now every time Alex and I fight with our beautiful son, our 3-year-old, it's just a handful, but every time we fight to get his teeth brushed or to give us space when we're working, or just every time we have to wrestle with this kid, I have to remind myself that motherhood is not about willpower. It's about trusting your gut and making space for the life that's already trying to find me. So that's my story about how I became a mother. It was totally unexpected. I couldn't have planned it. I couldn't have anticipated it. I don't, for the life of me, know what happened, right? I don't know exactly what happened or what went right, what went wrong, whether it was something medical or by chance or whether it was something existential and spiritual. But I think for me, it was just about trusting my gut. And I needed to trust my gut about who I had a family with and to feel safe and loved and cared for as I was building a family of my own. So I know it's not the typical episode where I give tips or a summary of research, but I really appreciate you all listening. I know that a lot of you out there have struggled with infertility or not being sure with their partner or wanting a family and not knowing how to build it. And I just want to say that I know what that feels like. And sometimes it's just about letting go. It's the hardest thing to do, but sometimes it just takes some trust and being open to what feels right. Please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It really helps us. And send this to a friend or someone you know who just needs to hear this, who needs to hear a story of hope. And I will see you all next week. Thanks so much. By accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that the host of this podcast makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information purposes only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial, informational purposes only, and do not constitute the practice of any medical or any professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The host does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast. And information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Thank you.